being today. Over the years, there have been a few options, but in recent times, that has changed tremendously, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Azure functions, we'll see a quick introduction at what Azure functions are and how they help as being extensibility options for your business logic needs. And finally, I will just go on for a quick demo where I'll show you of Azure function. I have a couple of Azure functions that I have already written and they are hosted, and we'll see how we can consume them. The multiple formats or ways in which one single Azure function can be executed depending on your requirements. And at the end, we can look into, I'll open the stage for Q&A. If you have any questions, meanwhile, you can just put forward in the chat window. And depending on if my screen takes a while to load or something, I can have Raz or somebody just get those questions to me. So getting started. So in most of the implementations that you go about, there is a definite need for adding some custom business logic. So while Microsoft has taken care of the most common business logic needs that are available while in terms of validation and saving of records and things like that, at the platform level, there is always something that is very specific to a customer that needs to be developed as a custom business logic. So some of them being some kind of calculations or updating, reading, writing info if you're trying to do some kind of an integration with third party app, or maybe sometimes there is a need that you want some process to be executed at regular intervals, something like a night job that runs and processes all the records and designs some statements or updates records or calculates overdue dates or overdue days or amounts or something of that sort. So these are usually, I would say I can easily categorize them in these three distinct categories that are available. And on the right side, you can see that what are the usual limitations or problems that we have come across traditionally when implementing these. So in terms, the first being the 2-minute timeout. So if you write any custom logic as a plugin or a workflow, it is a requirement of the CRM Online sandbox environment to make sure that your code is executed within 2 minutes, failing which your process will time out. The other being that being CRM Online, you do it, all the code that you write is executed under sandbox restrictions, which means that sometimes you don't have access to API or DLLs that probably these third-party integrations have made available. So that could be one of the issues when you're trying to integrate using the traditional methods. And again, if we look at these nightly jobs, there isn't really a scheduler in CRM out of the box at the platform level. As of until a few years ago, there wasn't a way within CRM. There isn't even now a way to do a scheduler in a native way. Yes, there are hacks. You can use the use bulk delete logic to get your code executed at regular intervals, but scheduler as such is not available, and there are always hacks that you need to do. So even though I'm pointing out these issues, traditionally we have learned to live with them. We have found workarounds to get things to do, but there hasn't been a clean way of doing things really. So what are the extensibility options that are available today? Now, traditionally, plugin assemblies and workflow assemblies have been the way to go. So when we say plugins and workflows, what we mean is so you can register messages, you can capture the messages. So say create, update, delete, things like that. These messages, so these actions, when users perform these actions, and if you want some custom code to be executed, then you could create a plugin or a workflow assembly, register it in CRM, associate the steps on which you want the plugin code or the workflow to trigger, and then that's how you could get your custom business logic incorporated. Now, like I said, discussed before, one of the limitations of the plugin and workflows had been the 2-minute timeout that was there. Now, webhooks sound relatively new, but I guess they've been around for a couple of years now at least. So that's another way that you can now write your custom code. In case of webhooks, the custom code is, instead of being hosted as an assembly within the CRM application and database, it is actually executed outside of CRM. So you can host it, it's hosted as a web application, and then from CRM you just post the message to the webhook, and the code is executed outside the context of CRM. And relatively newer options available is Power Automate. So Power Automate, traditionally known as Microsoft Flow. So using Power Automate flows, which is also touted as the no code, low code option for power users, you now have options to design complex business logic around without even having to write a single line of code. Now, one of the key components of Power Automate is connectors. So for these power users to actually be able to design business logic when it comes to reading or writing data from the various applications, be it CRM, CDS, or any third-party applications, the key component over there is the connector. So somebody has to make a connector available with the various actions exposed that the connector can perform, and the triggers on which the custom connectors can be invoked. So we will see today how you can write your own custom connectors as well, which could be a way again of extending your business logic for power user consumption. So moving forward, let me just quickly go through each of the. So I have skipped plugins and workflow assemblies over here. I am assuming that everyone over here would be aware of plugins and workflows, which have been around since probably 3.0, 4.0 days now. So, however, if you have any questions, then you can leave a message in the chat window, and we can get back to it at the end. Coming to webhooks. Now, what's webhooks? Webhooks is like I said, it's a web application. It's a lightweight HTTP pattern with a publish and subscribe model. So once a webhook is, so you design a webhook and you host a webhook. Once you host a webhook, then from you can, just like you register a plugin assembly or a workflow assembly, you can actually register the endpoint of this webhook, which is a usual something in the form of HTTP sample hook dot azurewebsites.com or something. So you could have this. It is an HTTP URL. So you register this HTTP URL as a webhook, just like you do your assemblies, and then you can register your steps, or you can even invoke the webhook from within a workflow assembly. So when you register these, when you register the webhook and associate a message, so when you say that you have registered the webhook, and then you add a create step to this webhook, anytime a record is created, CRM sends. So earlier, when it would execute it would call the plugin and it would execute the plugin. It used to pass in all of the context information to the plugin. Similarly, in the webhook, when the webhook is invoked, CRM will pass on all of the similar context information. In fact, it's the same. So whatever you used to get as the plugin execution context, you now get that as a remote execution context in your webhook for consumption. Now, webhooks can be, so you can register your steps either as sync or async. it still follows the 2-minute timeout. So if the webhook is not able to return complete the code execution and return the status message within the 2 minutes time frame, then the execution times out and you will get an error. Now, as if you register it as a sync, similar to your plugins, which when registered as sync, you can throw an exception and it will roll back. So, similarly, in case of webhook, if you have registered a sync step, then any error that is thrown from the or returned from the webhook will cause your action to be rolled back. So over here, it looks for an error status code. So HTTP, it's basically HTTP message. So it is HTTP status code. So anything that is a non-2xx status code. So if it's not a 201 or any of the status code that starts with 2, then it is considered as an error status code, and then it will show an error. Now, one of the limitations of webhooks in terms of throwing an exception message or displaying an error message is that you will not be so in plugins. What we were able to do is when we throw an exception, we could give a descriptive message for the users explaining why the execution could not complete. However, in case of webhooks, you cannot do that. As of today, you will simply get a very generic message that says that the code could not be executed or something similar. So this is one of the limitations, that you will not be able to show descriptive error messages. But yes, in case of a sync, it will roll back and it still follows the 2-minute timeout. Moving forward to Power Automate Flows. Power Automate Flows is, like I said, the no-code, low-code automation framework. Now, similar to your plugins and workflows, it has support for event-based triggers. So similarly, again, like I said, it depends on connectors. So the CDS connector has now provided support for most of the common messages or triggers that were available for plugins. So you talk about create, update, delete, things like that. So these are event-based triggers. Again, one of the differences between plugins and workflows had been that we could do an on-demand. We could register a workflow as an on-demand workflow, which means that users could manually execute the workflow. Now, support for manual on-demand workflow also exists with Power Automate Flows. Another option is a flow button that you can execute through a mobile app. So you have a Power Automate mobile app, and you can actually, if you have designed a flow to trigger on a flow button, then you can see the flow button on the app and you can execute your code from there. Now, like in the first slide, I did stress upon the fact that there is no native way of doing some kind of a scheduled or a recurring job. This is now overcome with the Power Automate framework. You now have a schedule or a recurrence trigger available using which you can execute logic or process at set time intervals. Now again, Power Automate Flow also go a step forward where it allows for as a very recent update. It now allows for integration with non-API based legacy systems through its UI flows concept. So what we mean by non-API based legacy system is, usually if you see if you talk about a connector or you talk about code to be executed, these are all HTTP APIs that are being hosted, and then you just pass a message, then you just make a call to that API and the business logic is within the API, it executes. Now in legacy systems, traditional legacy systems, there wasn't really a concept of an API. So there was no API. People would, there was process driven, function driven code written, and there was nothing of that sort. So UI flow comes in as a big help over there in terms of integrating with such non-API based legacy systems. The other options that we were talking about is custom connectors. So now Power Automate Flow depends on a core piece of your Power Automate Flow is a connector. So you can just, similar to the various connectors. So So Microsoft, say if you go on the Power Automate site, you will see that there are hundreds of connectors that are made available. Now these are publicly made available. They have gone through a certification process, and these are commercial options available, made available by ISVs. But if you would like to design some custom code that you traditionally write in as a plugin or a workflow, if you would like to have this available, you could actually write that code as a connector. So the advantage of making a connector instead of a plugin or a workflow is it automatically exposes this logic to your power users through the Power Automate framework. Besides, you can also execute your connectors directly through Power Apps. So if you've created a Canvas app and you want to invoke some custom logic that requires C# development, so you could create a connector. You could create a function hosted as an API, create a connector out of it, and now your power users and users can just simply make a call to the connector and get your custom code executed. So again, custom connector is nothing but a wrapper around a REST API. It is a easy to use component for your power users, but behind the scene, it is your REST API pro code, .NET code written function over there. Now, so at the core, so we talked about three things over here. Like we talked about Power Automate, we talked about custom connectors, we talked about webhooks, and at the core of it all is Azure functions. So you can write an Azure function, and this can be consumed in each of the three ways that I just discussed, and this is what I'm going to include in my demo today. So before we hop into the demo, let me just quickly talk about what Azure function is. Azure function is a serverless computing service that is hosted on Microsoft Azure. What does it, in simple layman term, what it means is your code not hosted, instead of being hosted as a DLL on your machine or on CRM online, it is your code hosted on Microsoft Azure. Now, one point to note over here is that unlike your plugins, which are hosted within the CRM database, and these are hosted in Azure, and therefore they require an Azure subscription. Azure subscription does not come by default in along with your D365 or Power Apps plan subscription. You will need a special Azure function to be able to host your Azure functions and then consume them. Now there are two consumption models that are available: the app service model or the consumption model. Consumption model means it depends on the calls that are made to your Azure function. So your transactions are calculated based on the number of calls, and you will be charged accordingly. In the app service model, it's a flat fee that you use, and then you can host your functions on it's a flat fee, so it is not consumption. So irrespective of whether there is a zero call made or a number of calls made, it's a flat fee that goes about with it. Like I said, the code resides outside on Azure, and again, the execution time limit for the consumption plan could be extended to 10 minutes. So there is a limit, and it can be extended to 10 minutes. But if you opt for the app service plan, app service model, then the default is 30 minutes, but you could reset it to be to have no time limits at all. So Azure function is a very powerful component that has been made available on the Azure cloud that has multiple usages. So now let me just quickly hop into demo. So in the demo, what we'll start with is I already have an Azure function created. So I'm just going to quickly walk you through the code and show you how it functions. Then I have already registered the Azure function. I have published the Azure function to Azure. So we are going to see the steps on how to go about creating a custom connector out of this Azure function. Once the connector is ready, we are going to use this connector, invoke this connector from a Power Automate flow, and see how easy it is now for code to be executed by end users, power users, without any knowledge of any development tools. Again, now the same Azure function that we have written and converted into a custom connector, we'll see that we can actually register this Azure function as a webhook now. So I have a second example of Azure function where it accepts, it has been designed to accept the payload that it will receive from CRM when it is registered as a webhook. So we'll see how that payload can be read and interpreted, and then we'll register a step against the webhook, perform the action in CRM, and see the webhook execute. So let me just quickly switch here to my development environment. So let's start with this first Azure function that I've created. Now this Azure function is created to demonstrate the usage of custom code or creating a custom connector out of your custom code logic. So I have created a very simple function over here. It's called get tax rate, and all it does is you send it a tax code and it will read from CRM the appropriate tax code, and it will return the tax rate. So again, I have kept it really simple for the demo purposes. You can obviously do the same thing using Power Automate without the need for writing any code. But just to demonstrate how Azure functions work, this is a very simple example that I have taken. Now in this example, this is a V3 Azure function. So this is a V2 Azure function using .NET Core 3.0. So Microsoft has recently released the .NET Core assemblies for CDS. Now you can go and so they are available on NuGet, and you can easily search for them. So this is what you can search for: Microsoft the Power Platform, the CDS.client. When you search for it, make sure to check the include pre-release checkbox, because this is still a pre-release. It is in preview. It is not GA yet, but it is available for developers to go ahead, try it out, report issues if any, for Microsoft to fix. So as you can see, this is an alpha release. So in this, for this Azure function, I've made use of the .NET Core assemblies, and this is using the .NET Core 3.1 framework. Now, if I can quickly walk you through the code. Now, one thing to note over here is, so as a query parameter, it accepts the tax code. It will accept the tax code that is there, and then if I scroll down over here, now one thing to note over here is you will see that I have provided CRM connection details. This is because your Azure function is being executed from outside the CRM environment, which means that it does not have the connection to your CRM, an advantage that your plugins and workflows have. So when you write a plugin or workflow assembly, you don't really need to establish connection. You automatically get the connection in the context. But when you create a Azure function, it is executed outside the CRM environment, and you will explicitly need to establish a connection with the CRM. So here I have within the header, I accept the URL because I'm going to create a connector out of it, a custom connector. So I have given the option that the user, when they create a connection to my connector, they can provide the URL against which they want this code to be executed. So for that reason, I've provided the URL client, and again for connection, I'm using the service connection method. So you need to create an application. So you need to create an app. Register an app in Azure, using which after which you will get the client ID and secret, and using these details, using the client, this app ID or the client ID needs to be registered in CRM as an app user. Once that and a security role needs to be assigned to the app user. So once that thing is done, you could use these connection details to actually rewrite data from to your CRM. So over here, I have the find rate function. It passes the code and the connection details. If I scroll down over here, so you can see that even the .NET Core assemblies that are made available, they use the simplified connection string from your traditional days. So there's not much that is changed over there. So you provide the auth type as client secret, the URL client ID secret. With that done, you can just create your client or service client object. When your CDS client object is created. Now here, just for demonstration purposes, I have written a fetch XML so that we can show that you could even execute a fetch XML using a retrieve multiple. And then finally, what I've done is once the tax code is found, I create a JSON object and I pass the tax rate and taxable information in the JSON object as a output for my Azure function. So if you can see over here, if I scroll down here, you will see that I am returning this as a JSON object over here. Now let me just quickly switch back to so here is the Azure function that is that I have just written. I have hosted it over here. Now before going further, I would just like to point out that Azure functions can be secured. One of the ways of securing Azure functions is through keys, app keys. So so here there is the default app key that is there. Now every time you make a call to the Azure function, you need to pass this app key as an authentication method. If you do not pass the app key, or if the app key is invalid, your Azure function will not execute. So this is one way of securing your Azure functions over there. Now, I will also show you the log stream over here, just so that I can. In the log streams, I have written some log information. So when we execute, we can see the log information over here. So this is helpful when you've written some debug information and you want to ensure that the execution is as required. So over here, I have my function get tax rate. Okay, this is my function. If you click on the get function URL, then this is the function URL that is there over here. Get tax code along with the code. The code is your function key that I just explained as app keys over there. So there is function keys at the function level as well. So you can create a function key, and the function key needs to be passed as a parameter for successful execution. So now using this URL, you can actually execute this. A very quick way of verifying whether your Azure function works is to quickly pass. So I have this Azure function over here. I have passed the function key and a tax code. Now if I send this over here, I had returned a JSON object. So if this call is successful, it is going to return a JSON object. So as you can see over here, it was able to identify, it was able to read the data and find the rate and is product taxable. It was able to return this. Now, one of the reasons for showing you this execution through Postman is that the next step, what we're going to do is, with the Azure function hosted, we are now going to go about creating a custom connector for this. So there are various ways to create a custom connector, and one of the ways that the Power Platform supports is through Postman collection. So I'm going to actually save this call as a collection. So I can say create collection, and you can save this call in that collection. So I've already created a collection called root core sample. Now you can go and export this sample as a V1 collection. So even though it says deprecated, please use the collection V1, because the Power Platform, when you go to create a custom connector, it is looking for a V1 collection object from Postman. So you need to export this. Once this is exported, okay, once this is exported over here, so here you can go to make.powerapps.com, and in the custom connectors is where you are going to create your own connector. So my connector, the code my connector is in that Azure function that I have written. So over here, if you see, you have the option of the various options available. So in this session, I'm demonstrating how import a Postman collection works. So when you say import a Postman collection, give a name to your collection, and then the file that you had exported from there is what you will choose over here. Okay. Yeah. So I have already created a connector over here. So when you import your collection, it automatically copies the definition over here. So let me just first go step by step each of the points. So in the general section, this is where you're going to describe what your connector does. So especially if you want to make this available even for power users or as an ISV, it is important information that will enable your users to know what this connector does. Okay. Now we have hosted it on Azure, so it's an HTTPS scheme, and this is the URL. So root core sample, this is what. So this will automatically get filled in when you import the Postman collection object. Next, moving forward, is what kind of authentication do you need? So if the API key OAuth 2.0, so if you were instead using some kind of a graph API or something, and you wanted some native AAD authentication or something, you could go about using the OAuth. Now, since this is a very simple example, I've simply kept no authentication, and I am accepting the function key as a parameter for the authentication. So over here, I just simply say no authentication. Moving to the definition. Now, this is where, so get tax rate is, so if you can see over here, if you have ever used Power Automate and added any connector, you would see that there are actions and there are triggers. So in my example, I've not created a trigger, but basically my get tax rate is an action that I've created. So I'm registering it as an action. So again, give descriptive details about what your function does. Operation ID, this is a unique code that you need to give. Now coming down over here, so this is a get request. I had done a get request. If you see in my Postman, it was a get request. So when it imported, it did a get request here again. It will automatically create these query parameters for you. So in the query parameter now, because for the purposes of demo and a quick execution, I have already typed the function key in the default value. You could leave it blank over here, and you can provide what the format is. Similarly, you have the second parameter that I have, which is actually the tax code. Now I've made both of these query parameters required because that's how my code, my Azure function has been written. It needs a tax code to read the tax details. Now I have also added attributes to my custom headers in my header. This is where I'm going to accept my CRM details. So if you see in my Azure function, I had shown you that from the header, I had read all of my CRM connection details, the URL, client ID, secret, and that using that information, the connection with CRM was established. Now, once you do this, you could also do a quick test over here. So pass all of the details to test operation to ensure that your connector is functional. Once the connector is functional, Now this connector is ready for use within your Power Automate. So here I have created a get tags flow automatically. Again, for demonstration purposes, this is extremely simple. When the record is selected, if you come back over here, just like you add any other connector, so let me just show you over here. When you go to add connection, now because I had created this connector within the same environment, when I type core sample connector, so this is my connector and this is my action. There is no trigger because I did not define any trigger. So it is now as simple as this for a power user to actually consume your connector that is there. So this was one implementation of your Azure functions. You created, and now again, instead of creating a connector, you could obviously use the HTTP trigger. So if I, instead of adding this connector, I could have simply used HTTP, and I could have used the HTTP trigger and my same Azure function URL. I could have passed and done it, but that would be a little of pro code. So you would have required to know a lot of information in terms of header, body, things like that. So this is when you convert it to a connector, it's an end user implementation of your Azure function. Now I know I'm running short on time, so very quickly I will just show you a second example over here. Now this has been designed as a V1 Azure function, which means that this is using your .NET assemblies. It is not the .NET Core, but it is your traditional .NET assemblies that we use. That is what is being used over here. Now here in the process logic, the main thing to focus upon is the payload that you receive. So once you receive the payload, now it is an HTTP request. Okay, so it is an HTTP request that I have designed this function to be as. So as a payload within the body, you're going to get information. You get the what you receive is a remote execution context type of object. This remote execution context is nothing but your plugin execution or a workflow execution context. So it has all the properties that your plugin execution would return is what you get in your remote execution context as well. So just similar to, like, in plugins we would do input parameters contain target, primary, pre-entity image, post-entity image. So everything that you did in your plugin is the same that you would do in case of here. It's just instead of plugin execution, you will call it remote execution. So again, here again, if you see, I'm creating a record. I create a record in CRM, but again, to create this record, I will be creating a connection to CRM. Again, that's because this is an Azure function and it is not being executed within the context. So even if you register as a webhook, the connection is not passed through to your function, and you need to establish your connection explicitly to read write data from CRM. So here I have just quickly created. So I've registered it on accounts. Every time an account is created, it will go and create a contact and set the parent customer ID as the account which you just created, so that it gets associated, and I've created a note against the contact. So this is a very so the important thing over here is the remote execution context that is there. Now I will just quickly create an account over here, and let me just keep this window open. Okay, let me just keep the monitor open over here because I have actually written the payload that we receive as in the webhook, so that you can see what information you receive. So over here, Now, this webhook, I will also quickly, I have the plugin execution tool open, so I will show you over there how this plugin has, this webhook has been registered. If we switch back over here, this is what it is. So this is the same JSON object that you receive in case of your, so you get your initiating user ID, you get the input parameters, so everything that business unit ID, so everything that you got within your plugin execution is what you get over here as well. So you just need to make sure to deserialize it, and then so you have the stage 0, all of the information that is there, that is you will receive over here. And then one final thing that I would like to focus upon over here is this is how you register. So when I click on a webhook, so over here you will say new webhook. In the register, you have the option register new webhook. So when you register a new webhook, you will provide the endpoint URL, then you provide the HTTP. So in my case, in my function, I was receiving code as a parameter for my function key. So authentication will be HTTP query string over there. And then here I will type the code and the value that is to be passed over here. Now, having done that, after that, come back over here. And just like you register any other step, you'll go ahead and register. So you can do it on a pre-operation, post-operation. It is up to you. Synchronous, asynchronous. Now, one point to note is in case of sync, like I said, if there's an error, it will roll back. In case of async, it is executed as a job, system job. So if there is an error, you need to go in your system job and check for the check for failed jobs over there. Again, there is no way to see any error message that is there because you cannot pass an error message from them. And there is a 2-minute timeout. So here, so here I had done a very quick test over here. So I had made it wait for 4 minutes. So if you have this function wait for 4 minutes, you were in your CRM because it was a pre-operation that I had registered. I got a message and I was not able to save my record. And similarly, if you create if you want to throw an exception, so in case of a validation in pre-operation, you want to do a validation, the validation fails and you want to stop execution. So you can do a create error response, but any error message that you display over here will not be displayed to the user. It's a generic message that comes. So that is all that I had to include in my presentation. And I'm now open to questions. Raz, if there are any questions on the window.
Thank you again, Roohi. Thanks, Yash.
I think there's one question, Roohi, over here. So Azure function has 10 minutes timeout, is it?
Yeah, so depending on your plan, depending whether you are on the consumption plan or the app service plan, your timeout limit is set accordingly.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I hope that answers the question. And I just have one more. So is it a best practice to store the client ID and the client secret to a function?
So not really, but again, so maybe you could make use of Azure Vault or something of that for secured storage. But here for the purpose of a quick demonstration, I had included. But I'm sure there are better ways to get that done.
Okay, cool.
So the point,
I guess, yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, the point was that I just wanted to demonstrate is that we need to make an explicit connection, and that's why I very quickly passed on that information over there, just to stress on the point that you will need to pass connection details for the CRM that you need to connect to, and connection information is not automatically passed over.
So I'm guessing that we can call an Azure Key Vault in an Azure function and then pass the keys from there, right?
Yeah, I have not personally tried it, but I believe like I said, there should be better ways. This was just a very simple thing that for demonstration purposes that I've done.
Got it. Okay. And then we have one more question says, so if we have strict rules to secure a function, do webhooks have other options than app keys?
Uh, I have, so again, if I go back over here, so either these are the three options that are available as of now. Either you pass it in the header or the webhook key or the query string. I have not personally used any other method in regards to registering a webhook and then trying it out.
Got it. Okay.
Are there any other questions, Yash?
Not yet. So I'm just looking forward if there's any.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to be on time. So if you all think I just rush through a bit, and if you want me to, I have like 7 minutes. So if you want me to go back and show something, I can do it. I just want to make sure I finish it on time.
Yeah, that's fine. I have a few more questions coming on now. So there's one saying that if you would recommend using early bound classes in combination with Azure Functions.
Generally, traditionally, I have always found using late bound. So even in normal development, I get into late bound instead of the early bound. My personal preferences have always been late bound. It just gives me flexibility. I do not have to keep generating the classes all the time. So
Yeah, makes sense. And I have one other one. So this says that can we point out to a single Azure function from dev, test, and prod environments?
so yeah, I mean, could you elaborate on that question? So you have an Azure function, and does it mean that your CRM connections for each of these three would be different, and you want a way to pass different information over there, or because once you have the function hosted, you could call from all three. So I'm not sure I really get your question.
I guess it's about that if we can call the same function from three environments. So I think that should be fine.
Yeah, yeah, because unlike your Power Apps or Flow or something, which is within an environment, this is just hosted on Azure. It's an HTTP URL, so a request, so you can actually just post the request from any environment over there.
Got it. Okay. And there's one more question. So it says that if we enable authorization for Azure function and call it using a PCF inside a Dynamics form, so how can we configure a redirect URL? Because it's like every record would have a different URL, right?
Every record would have a different URL.
So I believe
So
it's like yeah.
so if you have it's so if you if you've created a PCF and you want to make a call to an Azure function, that's what the question is, right?
Yes, a part of the question. Yes.
Yeah. So again, like I said, it's an Azure function, so you can make any call over there, and then you will receive your output whatever you've passed. So I'm not sure what you mean when you say redirect URL, because when you post the when you make a call to this API as your function, it will return you the results out there. It's an HTTP request.
Okay. And then there's one more which says that is it possible to call an Azure function from another Azure function?
Uh, so actually yes. When I was working around with Azure functions, uh, one of the ways to get around with the 10-minute time limit that is there was to call child function. So some kind of a nested function. So from within one you call the other to the other. So that way each function gets the 10 minutes and then it goes on. So yeah, it is possible to call a function from another function.
Got it. Okay. And I think that was the last question. Okay, so there's a couple more. Uh, do we have any way to rotate the authentication key of Azure function in case it gets compromised?
Yeah, so you can, there was a remove function. So if you say renew key value, then it will just regenerate a new value, and your old value is invalidated. And the other option obviously is delete this and create a new if required.
Okay. And so does this mean that we need to renew the key in the plugin registration tool?
Yes, so yes, you will have to, because like I said, your call to the function will be successful only if the key over here and the key that you have passed matches. So if you are to renew a key over here, you will need to register the same. You need to update your plugin in the plugin registration tool.
Got it. So thank you so much, Ruhi, for the information. I'm just passing on your contact information on the chat. That is your Twitter and LinkedIn. So folks can reach out to you in case they have more questions. And
Sure. And
the
here is the survey link, and there's also the code over here. So if you can scan and please submit your surveys, I would be grateful. I'm not a speaker. I do not present prior quite often. So any feedback, good, bad, ugly, most welcome. Please, thank you.
all right, I have also added the survey link on the chat, so people you can navigate from the chat also to the survey link, and please provide your survey. It will be helpful for us in constructing the sessions in a better way moving forward.